This time on Psychic Investigators. A young woman vanishes without a word.
In the back of my mind, she was hitchhiking and somebody had gotten a hold of her.
The police think she's run away, but a psychic sees murder.
I feel it was a crime of passion.
The case goes cold for almost 30 years.
We thought that, something more could be done on the case. Let's take another look at it and see where it goes.
But can a psychic's visions crack a cold case from so long ago?
You really can't expect somebody that's been lying for 25 years to all of a sudden say, I did it.
Los Altos, California, in the foothills of the Santa Cruz Mountains. Once known for its orchards, by the late 1970s, it's become a bedroom community for Bay Area commuters.
It was a very quiet, calming place. It was affluent as it is today. The people who lived here cared greatly about their community.
Los Altos is a safe haven, a good place to raise a family, or so it seemed. On March 28, 1978, 17-year-old Laura Ann Byerly, a student at Los Altos High, vanishes without a trace. When she doesn't come home that night, her parents file a missing persons report. Police quickly decide Laura has run away, with good reason.
She had run away at least 6 times, and she had had problems with her parents. She would run away, she would disappear. She had been gone for several weeks, and then she would reappear, come back home. She'd always keep in contact with her friends, and then, come back into the household to make amends with her mom.
Mary Cressy has been Laura's best friend since the 8th grade.
Every time that she ran away, I was always the first person she'd go to. She ran away, but she always came right back.
Her parents, Erwin and Betty Byerly, are sure that this time she hasn't run away. Recently, she's been turning her life around.
She was rebuilding her relationship with her parents. She had decent friends and wanted to change.
But the police are certain that Laura has taken off, and her friends are hiding it.
So you guys saw her yesterday, and if you guys have seen her, you know her.
They questioned us about last time we had seen Laura. And they said, well, has she contacted you? And I said, no. I was like a sister to Laura. We stuck together through everything. We would take her parents' station wagon out, and we'd unhook the speedometer so they wouldn't know we were going somewhere. We would say we'd be in town going shopping, but actually we'd hit Santa Cruz. She was just a social butterfly. She trusted people.
At the Byerly's insistence, police proceed with a routine missing persons investigation. They discover that the day she disappeared, Laura broke up with one young man, Scott Schultz, and made a date with another, John McFoland.
The day she had disappeared, she had gone to school that morning. She had the same class as this John McFoland in the morning. 2 witnesses say they saw her leaving, going into the parking lot area. She did not go to her second period class. She was never seen again.
The police question Laura's ex, Scott Schultz.
He tells the police that he was home and he never saw Laura. He thought she was going to hitchhike over to the house.
The police have no reason to doubt Scott Schultz. Laura is known to hitchhike. With no witnesses and no evidence of foul play, the investigation winds down. But there's still no sign of Laura, and her mother won't give up.
She didn't know why she would run away. She didn't know why she just disappeared. She had no idea what happened.
Betty felt in her heart something had gone wrong. I was the one that suggested to hire a psychic, and that's where Annette Martin came in.
Annette Martin is a well-respected California psychic who's helped to solve crimes for law enforcement agencies across the country, including the FBI. 10 days after her daughter's disappearance, Betty Byerly visits the psychic and provides her with a photograph of Laura.
I close my eyes and I take a couple of deep breaths, and immediately I begin to receive impressions from that photograph. Laura did not run away at all. The police are wrong.
Then, the psychic says something no mother wants to hear.
The most difficult thing in the world is to tell a mother that her child is dead.
"17-year-old Laura Byerly has gone missing from her Los Altos home. Desperate to find her daughter, Betty Byerly has met with a psychic. What she tells her is devastating.
My daughter's dead?
It feels that way.
Oh my God.
It feels that way.
Oh my God.
I'm not getting any impulses of life here. She's very cold. She's very cold to me.
Then the psychic offers another striking revelation. She names the killer.
I saw a name, and the name was Scott. She goes, "That's her boyfriend." Then I saw that he had taken her to this place that was in the woods, and saw him driving down towards Santa Cruz. They were arguing and fighting. I saw him shaking her. I feel it was a crime of passion. And then I saw him bury her in a very shallow grave. Betty was in a state of shock. I had said that the police would not find her body, but I saw a hiker finding her body. And I said to Betty, have they spoken to this Scott? And she said, yes, they have.
Betty clings to the hope the psychic is wrong. But in her heart, she believes Laura is dead, murdered by her boyfriend, and buried in the Santa Cruz Mountains.
I remember sitting in her mom's living room and crying our eyes out together, going, no, it can't happen. It can't happen to her only daughter.
Laura's mother turns the tape over to the police and begs them to look more closely at Scott Schultz. She tells them that Laura and Scott have been dating for 6 months, that he's bad news, controlling and possessive, a dropout who's going nowhere.
With Scott, she seemed to be a different person. She would sit there and would clam up. I felt in my heart that she was almost afraid of him.
But Laura was moving away from her boyfriend. The morning she disappeared, she broke up with him in a long phone call Laura's mother describes to police.
The phone call started about 1:40 in the morning, and they talked for 4 hours. According to Laura, they talk about their relationship, how she's, no longer wants a relationship with him. He's very emotional. He cries on the phone several times related to them breaking up, and that she's going in a different direction. In the morning, she notices that Laura's crying, and Laura tells her, hey, I just broke up with Scott. I broke up with him on the phone. I feel bad that I didn't do it in person. And the mom just tells her, hey, don't worry about it. Just go to school, things will get better.
It's the last time Betty Byerly sees her daughter alive. Despite the psychic's suspicions, the police still have nothing to link Scott to Laura's disappearance. The police have nothing on him and no reason to believe Laura has been murdered. However, they search a small section of the mountains where the psychic says Laura will be found. But they find nothing. Police set the case aside. Weeks and months go by with no news. Then, more than a year after Laura vanished, hikers in the Big Basin State Park make a grisly find.
April 1979, some hikers in the Santa Cruz Mountains going along a trail. Their dog goes off to the side, and he brings out what appears to be a bone. The people kind of look at it, and then they discover that, hey, this is a human mandible. They also find some clothing and some other items, and they gather all these items. So they go alert the ranger who then calls the police department, and they recognize it as a crime scene.
The Santa Cruz County coroner concludes the young woman has been dead for at least a year. Her name is Laura Byerly. The police contact Mary Cressy, now living in Salem, Oregon.
They said that they'd like to fly in and interview me, and they would like to have me look at some items that belonged to Laura. I had to do this because her dad had died 6 months after Laura disappeared, and I don't think that her mom was able to handle the pressure. I had to identify her shoes. I had to identify her black polyester pants, and I had to identify her sheer flower top. That's all that was left. Her jewelry wasn't there, and Laura always wore jewelry. So I thought that was quite odd.
The Santa Cruz police join with Los Altos to investigate what is now considered a homicide. They re-interview witnesses, including Scott Schultz, but uncover no new leads.
The Los Altos detective re-interviews Scott at that time. In fact, at this time, it's the most thorough interview of Scott done by the Los Altos Police Department. But he's really never really taken on as a major suspect in this case. They can't tie him to the crime scene. They can't tie him to her disappearance. He's just kind of a player that really has never been identified. As far as they're concerned, she was a runaway.
Again, the case goes cold. In 1996, Betty Byerly dies in a house fire. With both her parents dead, it seems Laura's memory is dying too. But in 2005, nearly 30 years after she vanished, cold case investigator Detective Michael Shembri gets a call from Laura's old friend, Mary Cressy.
It was always in the back of my mind that there had to be an answer to this. And I said, you need to pursue it. You need to keep after them, and you need to make sure that this does not get closed again.
She felt at the time, in 1978, that the police department really hadn't done a thorough investigation. And she thought that if we reopened the case and started contacting people, maybe something could be done. And especially in this case, because there was really no family members alive, and there was really nobody else that was, kind of holding the torch to get this thing done. We read it, and we thought that, something more could be done on the case. Let's take another look at it and see where it goes.
One detail in Laura's file that catches the detective's eye is a reference to psychic Annette Martin. But the tape of the psychic's reading is missing.
Mike Shembri called me on the phone and said to me, I was just wondering if you would possibly have a copy of that tape. And I said, yes. I keep a copy of every single murder case. A
lot of these old cases, you'll find that the family has made contact with a psychic. It's not uncommon. If somebody has this ability, that's great. And in this case, it's been open for 25 years. It's certainly not going to hurt. Annette had specific information about the location of the body and what took place. And that information given at that time was not that far off base.
The psychic had predicted Laura's murder and how her body would be found. But will her visions help the police track the killer? It's been nearly 30 years since the remains of 17-year-old Laura Byerly were found in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Her killer has never been found. Cold case investigator Michael Shembri listens to the long-lost tape of a psychic reading.
Scott definitely has something to do with her disappearance. He's very sick.
In it, the psychic zeroes in on the boyfriend, Scott Schultz, who police eliminated as a suspect all those years ago.
So I wanted to talk to her to see if there was any other information or any other feelings that maybe I could take a look at or would point me in a direction where I would get other evidence that would really help in this case. When you're listening to a psychic statement and you're reading the psychic statement, you're still a police officer. So you know that you're just taking this information and you're gonna take it and see if you can do anything with it. Will it provide me a witness? Will it give me a better look at the crime scene? Will it show me a different location where they could have been earlier? Or give me something that I didn't have before? So that's how I looked at her information. Because you realize this information is not admissible in court. You can't walk into court and say, the psychic said that Scott Schultz killed her, so therefore we rest our case.
The deeper Shembri digs, the more his suspicions match the psychic's.
There were several facts that just didn't make any sense. The fact that she had talked to him that morning for 4 hours. She had gone to school and she had made a date in her first period class with her new boyfriend, John McFolin. Then she had a hair appointment later on at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. To me, a young lady that had just made a date with her new boyfriend, that had a hair appointment, she wouldn't run away. She wouldn't disappear unless something specifically happened to her.
Shembri tracks down Scott Schultz, now 46, and a mechanic in Loveland, Colorado. Before interviewing Scott, the detective talks to Cheryl Schultz, his ex-wife. The story she tells him only serves to heighten his suspicions.
She talks about an incident in 1990 where she is going through his items. She finds this box in the back of one of his dressers. And inside the box, she finds this article about this girl that has disappeared and the bones being found in the Santa Cruz Mountains. She also finds a ring and she finds a couple other items. And she kind of wonders, who is this? He's never talked to me about this, but obviously it's pretty important because he's kept the article. Eventually she asks him about this and he just kind of blows it off, just saying it was an ex-girlfriend. So you have that information, it's like, why would he keep these items?
Re-interviewing everyone who gave statements originally finally pays off. A woman who was a friend of Scott's reveals to Shembri that 30 years ago, Scott's uncle owned a weekend home 8 miles from where Laura's body was found. Scott knew the area well.
When I saw that he had an uncle that lived on China Grade, then I knew I could tie him to the crime scene. And once I knew I could tie him to the crime scene, then I knew this case was over with. All I had to do was build it up. All I had to do was get the circumstantial evidence that would put it all together, and that would give you enough probable cause to arrest this guy.
The 4-hour phone call, the box of mementos, now the connection to the crime scene. The detective has enough for a warrant. August 23, 2006. Shembri searches Scott's Colorado home. He discovers Laura's rings, her photograph, and a news clipping. Crucial evidence. Shembri gives psychic Annette Martin a call.
Michael Shembri told me that he was going the next day to Colorado to arrest Scott. And I said, oh, wonderful. Finally, we're going to have closure on this case.
Scott Schultz is arrested for the first-degree murder of his high school girlfriend, almost 3 decades earlier.
They called me up and said that they had just arrested Scott Schultz for the murder of Laura Byerly. I'll never forget it. And I just burst out in tears and said, finally.
Brian Welsh is the DA who prosecuted the case.
This really was a classic case of all the circumstantial evidence, when looked at in its entirety, pointed to Scott Schultz and his guilt. But he had steadfastly denied killing Laura when he had been interviewed on a number of occasions by the investigators.
Scott Schultz is extradited to California, where he pleads no contest to a reduced charge of voluntary manslaughter.
Voluntary manslaughter in this case is referred to as a heat of passion crime. Under California law, a person can plead either guilty or no contest. In this case, he pled no contest. At the time he entered the plea, the court informed him that a no contest plea would be treated as a guilty plea.
By pleading no contest, Scott Schultz avoids the uncertain outcome of a jury trial, and the full details of how Laura died are never revealed. But the cold case investigator's best guess is that she and Scott argued, emotions ran high, and Scott killed her in a fit of rage, just as the psychic visualized all those years ago.
Some people have the ability to see things. I mean, as you get older, there's a lot of things that you really firmly disbelieve when you were younger, that as you get older, you say, you know what, maybe that's possible.
Because he was a minor at the time, Scott Schultz is sentenced to just 2 years in prison.
I was saddened. Here, my best friend's gone, and all he got was 2 years. Where's justice? I feel in my heart that justice will be done, and he will eventually have to pay the price fully.
One thing is certain. Without the psychic insights of Annette Martin and the dogged determination of a cold case detective, the murder of Laura Ann Byerly may have remained unsolved forever.
An innocent ride home takes a gruesome turn.
It was a crime of absolutely no logical reason.
A family's desperate search for their missing brother turns up nothing until a psychic 2,000 miles away tells them where to look.
This is where you have to go, and this is where you find your brother's vehicle.
She had a lot of details. She didn't get them from us. She didn't get them from the media.
But her visions make legal history.
There was total and complete silence during her testimony. Never heard anything like that before.
River Ridge, Louisiana, a small town on the banks of the Mississippi River, a suburb of New Orleans.
Pretty much people in River Ridge know each other pretty well. It's just sort of a small slice of American pie type of community. You wouldn't expect a person, particularly a hardworking carpenter, to suddenly disappear.
But in June of 1987, that's exactly what did happen. 27-year-old Andre Daigle vanished without a trace.
My mother called me Friday morning and told me that Andre was, missing and she hadn't heard from him. We're a close-knit family and very tight, and Andre wouldn't leave the pets without food or water, for one. And the other thing is, generally somebody would hear from him on a daily basis.
Andre's older brother, Chris, contacts the police immediately, but they're not convinced there's a problem and are slow to act.
The fact that he was a 27-year-old grown man, the police were like, what makes you think he's missing?
But the family believes something is very wrong and begin their own investigation, retracing his last steps.
You sure you haven't seen this guy?
The night he disappeared, he and Nick Shelley went to have dinner together, and then they went out to Mitchell's to shoot some pool.
Andre and his best friend Nick were playing pool for beers. Loser buys. Andre lost the first game, and at the bar, he met a young woman who called herself Thelma.
And they chit-chatted, you know, just making small talk. When I talked to Nick about it, he tells me that he felt that she seemed to kind of hide her face, so he really didn't get a good look at her. It was a bit odd, but, you know, that's just something you don't think about. I mean, these are the things you think about later, after they played a few games and had a few drinks. You know, they were getting ready to leave, and that's when Thelma asked Andre for a ride home.
Andre agreed, and Nick Shelley went home separately in his own car. It's the last time he will ever see his best friend. 4 days pass, and nothing. 2,000 miles away in California, Andre's sister Elise is desperate to help. A friend suggests she visit a psychic.
When she came to see me, Elise told me she had a brother that was missing. I just asked her if she brought a picture of her brother and a map with her, and she said yes.
Rosemary Kerr lives in Escondido, California. She claims she has a special talent for finding missing people. She'll need it. She's never been to Louisiana and never met the Daigle family.
When I go to the picture, I don't need to look at it because the minute I put my fingers on it, I get vibrations. So my fingers, say it's like somebody reading Braille. I'm making my connection. Everybody else is out.
The connection Rosemary makes is immediate and profound.
As I'm touching the picture, I'm seeing all these things behind my eyes. I was telling Elise how I see her brother in his dark vehicle, and she denied this. She says, no, he drives the little white car. But I needed to go with the dark car because this is what Andre was showing me.
Elise is not aware that her brother has recently bought a new vehicle, a black Ford pickup. Now Rosemary focuses on the map of Louisiana.
And as I run my finger along the maps, my fingers tell me where to stop. It's a vibration in my fingers. And I stopped, and I opened my eyes, and I asked Elise, I says, Elise, do you know this place? Do you recognize this? Right in here. And she says, this is Slidell. She says, I know it. I says, if you know this place, you have to do it now, do it quick. This is where you have to go, and this is where you find your brother's vehicle and find out where he is.
Slidell is 30 miles from the Daigle home in River Ridge. Chris and the family had just arrived back after a full day of searching. They were not prepared for what would happen next.
We were all in the kitchen with the maps laid out, trying to figure out, okay, where are we going to go tomorrow? What are we going to do? That's when the phone rang, and my mother got the call from Elise.
I just had a reading with a psychic here.
You know, she says, the lady says to go to Slidell. Well, man, when she said that, everybody in the room just got shook. You know, you could feel goosebumps, and it was like the spirit had walked through there and touched you on the shoulder just to let you know, this is real, you gotta go.
Within minutes, Chris and his family are racing towards Slidell, guided, they believe, by the spirit of their missing brother.
They went out in their vehicles to look for Andre. I told them to talk to Andre. And Elise said, why? I says, I want the open connection.
So we did, we knew he was frightened. We didn't know if he was alive or not. And we just wanted to reach out to him, and let him know that, his family was there. So.
Then, incredibly, there on the interstate, Chris spots Andre's truck ahead. The black pickup is heading towards Slidell, exactly where the psychic said it would be.
I actually kind of passed the truck up at first. I didn't even expect to see it, really, but drove up. Hey, was that it? Sure enough, that was it. Of course, we didn't recognize who was in the, driver's seat and who was in there driving it.
How could a psychic 2,000 miles away know where to find Andre's truck? But where is Andre? And who's at the wheel? In River Ridge, Louisiana, the mysterious disappearance of 27-year-old Andre Daigle has his family searching everywhere. 5 days pass without any success. Then, a California psychic 2,000 miles away points them in the right direction.
This is where you have to go, and this is where you find your brother's vehicle.
And sure enough, going down the interstate on our way to Slidell. And there was the truck. Of course, we didn't recognize who was in the driver's seat and who was in there driving it. So we decided at that point that we'd just kind of stick with them and see where they led us.
Chris tails the truck for nearly 30 minutes. Suddenly, the truck veers off the interstate and leads them down a deserted side road.
They turned the truck around, facing back towards us, and then they killed the motor and turned the lights off. Well, that was very spooky, because now we knew that they knew we were following them. They drove by real slow and just kind of checked us out and looked at us, And as they got by, they took off. We had just drove down that road not seconds before, and it was empty. Here we are 30 seconds later, we go down the same road, and who do we see? A police car.
As luck would have it, they ran across the only patrol car in the Pearl River area, parked alongside the road that they were on.
We're all yelling, get that truck. Man, this is my brother. That's his truck. He's missing. You got to stop these guys. And that's when we got into a high-speed chase.
When police force the truck to pull over, they believe they're investigating a stolen vehicle.
Put your hand on top of your head.
I kind of walked up a little bit closer, and I asked him, I said, where's my brother? What'd you do with my brother? Where is he? Well, of course, they wouldn't answer.
But where is Andre? 2,000 miles away in California, psychic Rosemary Kerr believes she knows the answer.
When I felt myself holding my head and basically speaking louder and louder and louder because I could feel the pain, and I started yelling to Elise, my head is killing me. And as I felt that, I went into, I want to say, a different mode because I knew that I was looking for somebody that had already left the earth plane.
But Rosemary withholds this piece of information.
Elise did not ask if her brother was alive or dead. I am just the conductor of the words. I'm just a channel. But in order for it to be done the proper way, it has to go through the proper channels. It's for the authorities.
And the authorities were working fast. They identified the two men as 24-year-old Charles Gervais of New Orleans and 21-year-old Michael Phillips of Kenner. The two are brought in on stolen vehicle charges.
These two were not new to crime.
Captain James Gallagher of the Kenner Police Department is one of the officers in charge of the investigation.
The chief and his officers began interviewing Charles Gervais and Michael Phillips as to how they came in possession of the truck.
At first, Gervais isn't talking, but under questioning, his friend Michael Phillips eventually cracks. He describes a senseless, brutal murder, a murder committed, he says, by Gervais.
Once Charles realized that Mike was talking to the authorities, he demanded to speak to him, wanted to get the record straight. They talked about how they had Andre brought back to their apartment with Thelma. At some point, they retrieve a claw hammer out of Andre's truck. Then they take turns beating him with his own claw hammer.
The killer's motive was more extraordinary than even the police could have imagined.
The question was asked, why would you kill Andre? What was the purpose behind it? And Gervais tells me this story about hearing about a prostitution ring somewhere in Texas. And him and Mike decide, well, we don't want to work for a living. We'll just go to Texas and we'll kill whoever's running this operation and we'll take it over and the women will work for us. So they decide, well, if we're going to do this, we have to know before we get involved that we can actually take a life. So they come up with the scheme of sending Thelma out to bars and to look for someone, anyone, whoever she brings home, that person's going to die. And unfortunately, in this case, the person she brought home was Andre.
Andre Daigle was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, picked at random and killed as a dress rehearsal for a gangland hit, his body dumped in a swamp. Police recover the body. Both men are charged with first-degree murder and a warrant goes out for their accomplice, 21-year-old Thelma Horn of Kenner. Now police have to inform the family of their worst fear. Their youngest son, Andre, is dead.
You know, I never dreamed he would be dead. But it didn't work out that way. But at least we were able to find him and find the people who committed the crime.
But this case is far from over. Even with a confession, both men could still plead not guilty in court.
If the defendant doesn't take the stand and doesn't testify on his own behalf, you cannot use his statement against him.
In Louisiana, a not guilty plea can lead to the death penalty. Gervais sees the writing on the wall, admits his guilt, and is sentenced to life in prison. But Thelma Horn and Michael Phillips roll the dice. They plead not guilty and opt for a trial.
I think Michael was more concerned about consequences. He knew that we already pretty much had the whole story of what occurred, but he wanted to try and downplay his participation.
Gallagher needs as much evidence as possible. When he learns from Chris that it was a psychic's vision that led them to Andre's truck and exposed their killers, he reluctantly gives her a call.
You know, I deal with facts. I deal with things, you know, tangible things. And up until that point, I was still trying to figure out, you know, what the angle was. How did this happen?
Hello?
It was a phone call that would change a cop and make courtroom history.
There was total and complete silence during her testimony. Never heard anything like that before.
In Louisiana, the disappearance of a 27-year-old carpenter, Andre Daigle, has ended in murder. A California psychic has helped the Daigle family and police track down the killers. Now the police must work with a psychic to make sure the suspects are locked away forever.
Well, I learned that the way these people were actually caught was a tip from a psychic, a lady named Rose Kerr, who lived in California.
When Captain Gallagher contacts Rosemarie, she recounts the details of her reading with Andre's sister.
Coming to you. So I come into Andre's vibration, getting more and more headaches coming in very, very strongly.
Well, she was talking about, I'm feeling pain to my head right now as I'm handling his photograph. I already knew from the investigation that Andre had been beaten with a hammer.
The autopsy revealed that Andre had been struck 10 times in the head.
She talks about where the body's at and where Andre's at.
I could see and also feel a freeway or a roadway that was to my right and high above me. I knew there was a railroad track to the other side. I knew there was marshes there. The number 7 kept coming in and coming in very strongly.
When Gallagher travels back to the location where Daigle's body was found, he's amazed at the psychic's accuracy.
We got off on exit number 7 right down the road to get here. As Rose told me during my interview with her, she described a long bridge. And what we have behind me here is Interstate 55, which runs for about 24 miles, elevated through the swamp. She indicated there'd be water all around Andre. Well, here we are, next to the swamp here. She had a lot of details that she didn't get them from us. She didn't get them from the media, and it just, I was amazed, but I became a believer after talking with her.
But could a psychic's visions hold up in a court of law? W.J. LeBlanc, a Louisiana district attorney, thinks Rosemarie's testimony is key.
From an evidentiary standpoint, there were some people in the office who were skittish about using a psychic during a trial. My position was that she was a fact witness, and based upon what she saw, someone else relayed that information to someone else, which led to the arrest of the defendants.
The brutal and bizarre murder of Andre Daigle makes front-page news, but what really grabs headlines is the psychic.
This case, in many ways, was sort of a bellwether case in establishing psychic involvement as an important forensic tool in conducting investigations in cases that were very difficult.
Richard Boyd was the court reporter at the Daigle trial.
In my 10 years of covering courts, it was the most amazing, astounding chain of circumstances that I ever ran across.
It would be the first time in U.S. legal history that a psychic would take the stand and describe how her visions helped to solve a murder. In a suburb of Louisiana, when a young carpenter disappears, a psychic in California tells the family exactly where to look, but what they find exposes a gruesome and bizarre murder. Determined to get a conviction, the state makes a daring move and puts a psychic on the witness stand.
I didn't feel any qualms, no pressures or anything. It felt like it was the normal thing to do.
February 2nd, 1988, 1 year after the murder, the state presents its case to a packed courtroom. W.J. LeBlanc, the DA, outlines for the jury the gruesome details of Andre Daigle's last hours. On the night of June 9th, 1987, Andre Daigle was playing pool with his best friend, Nick Shelley. At the bar, he meets a young woman, Thelma Horn. She later asks for a lift home. Inside the apartment, Charles Gervais and Michael Phillips ambush Andre, attacking him with a hammer taken from a toolbox in his truck. Their botched murder finally ended when the two men used a vacuum cord to strangle Andre to death. They wrapped his body in a curtain and hid him in the back of a couch. The following night, they dumped his body in a swampy marsh below the causeway. The evidence against the two men is compelling. Now the DA calls the psychic to the witness stand to help seal the prosecution case.
You could hear a pin drop in that courtroom. I mean, people were just enraptured by it, just totally focused on her.
Thank you. There's an old
Rosemary Kerr tells the jury how her vision led the Daigles to Andre's missing truck.
You know, the emotion, it was just a chill went through the room.
At the close of the state's case, faced with the evidence, Michael Phillips changes his plea to guilty.
He was headed straight for the electric chair. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury was hanging on every word of every witness.
Without that information provided by Rose, which eventually led to the arrest, he would have been possibly another John Doe, unsolved homicide.
In a separate trial, the killer's accomplice, Thelma Horn, is found guilty of second-degree murder. With the help of the psychic's testimony, all three are serving life sentences.
I feel that this whole scenario wasn't in our hands, but in a higher power, and we all just did our job. And I have to give credit to the departments that work with people like me and realize if we can give them just one little piece of the puzzle, and that could help them, that's what we're about.
The Daigle family was devastated. To this day, is still devastated to a large extent by this senseless crime. A promising young man who was hardworking lost his life for absolutely no reason.
Andre was a great brother. You know, his life was cut so short. I don't know if he had time to even figure that out. Here's Rosemary, you know, a little lady living out there in California, you know, 2,000 miles away from us. Think that someone has that ability, you know, to make contact and into the spirit world like that and able to help, but she's connected.
An elderly widow is brutally murdered in her home.
This was an absolute senseless crime.
Police have little evidence and no one's talking.
There were so many people who were afraid that the killers were still in the community.
But a psychic has disturbing visions of the crime.
She had been stabbed so many times.
Can a psychic's insights solve the mystery of who killed Rose Swartwood? Elmira, New York, an historic town of clapboard houses and white picket fences. A town Huckleberry Finn author Mark Twain once called home. A town unaccustomed to crime. But not on August 25th, 1988. On that day, 74-year-old Rose Swartwood, widowed and living alone, is found dead in her apartment. She'd been the victim of a shocking attack, beaten, bitten, and stabbed to death.
I think the nature of the crime, being an elderly woman that lived alone, was very upsetting.
It caught a lot of the media attention and upset a lot of the people in the community.
I mean, it was a terrible, heinous crime.
Mike Moosey from the local sheriff's office and Corky Patterson from the Elmira Police Department are assigned to investigate this gruesome case.
Yeah, there hadn't been a murder in Elmira in several years.
Jim Pfeiffer is a journalist who covered the story.
What bothered people the most, I thought, was this is a woman who's innocent, who has no enemies. It could happen to me. You know, it isn't supposed to happen to anyone, but especially to people like this.
It was believed from the very beginning of this investigation that it was possibly a burglary gone to a homicide rather than a planned homicide. I think we felt quite strongly that this was not anticipated to be a homicide from the beginning, but more a burglary gone bad, and once confronted, turned into a terrible homicide.
Moosey and Patterson face major problems. Despite the apparent frenzy of the murder, little forensic evidence was left behind by Rose's killers.
The crime scene was very cleaned up. There were some things disturbed still when the police arrived there, but it appeared they had scrubbed down the walls and the floors with some type of cleaning agent.
Not only this, but locals are reluctant to talk.
A lot of times people just would clam up, or they'd give them false information. So it'd make it more difficult for the police, who in this community were used to quickly solving a crime.
Rose lived in one of Elmira's tougher neighborhoods, the Hawthorne Court housing project.
I believe there were people that felt they would be threatened if they cooperated with the police.
Scores of potential suspects are interviewed and eliminated. Only two rise to the top of the list. William Cuddy and Demetrius Moore, both local, both well-known to police.
We were relatively certain who these suspects were and what their involvement in the crime was.
With little evidence to tie Cuddy and Moore to the crime scene and no witnesses prepared to come forward, the investigation gradually stalls.
There were so many people who were afraid that the killers were still in the community. Police being blamed for not doing a good job, when that wasn't the case. They were doing a good job. They just couldn't get a lot of cooperation, a lot of information.
Months pass with no new leads. The case grows cold. But detectives Moosey and Patterson don't give up. They're not about to let Rose Swartwood's killers away with murder. 2 years after her homicide, with nothing to lose, Detective Moosey decides to try something very different. He decides to enlist a psychic.
I had heard about Phil Jordan from other law enforcement agencies. I had never been to him before. The Sheriff's Department had never used him before. To my knowledge, no other agency in this county had used him before. I spoke to Sergeant Patterson about it. We discussed it. We figured there was nothing to lose.
Phil Jordan is one of America's best-known psychics with a strong track record of helping cops solve difficult crimes.
I have been working with the police for the past 35 years.
Jordan uses photographs to make a psychic connection to crime scenes.
When I work on a case, I will take a picture of the victim. And as I look at that picture, I start seeing things about that person.
Detectives decide to tell Jordan nothing about Rose Swartwood or her murder.
When Corky and Mike came to the first meeting, they brought a picture of Rose Swartwood with them. And I looked at that picture and did a reading.
Right away, Jordan surprises the police.
The perpetrators, I felt, came into the dwelling believing they were going to do a burglary, and they were surprised to find that there was a person in the house. And then I feel as though both the perpetrators felt as though the whole situation went completely wrong, that they had gotten much more involved than they wanted to in the crime itself.
Jordan claims his visions reveal not only what happened during the crime, but also what the killers did after.
Then I felt as though they would try to put things back the way they had found it.
Again, the cops are surprised. Jordan has just identified the reason their investigation has so little physical evidence. But the big question is, can he tell them who killed Rose Swartwood? To find out, they hand him a stack of photos.
I took probably between 50 and 75 mugshots of various people to see if any of them had any significance to him whatsoever.
We had pictures of people who had been suspects but ruled out, and we had pictures of people who we didn't think had any involvement whatsoever. No names on any of the photographs or anything.
Just quietly, we sat there for approximately 10 or 15 minutes as he flipped through several mugshots. And I noticed, as did Sergeant Patterson, he pulled out a picture of Bill Cuddy and set it aside. He then continued to flip through the photographs, and probably 20 or 30 photographs later, he pulled a mugshot of Demetrius Moore, and he laid that down.
I felt one of the perpetrators would be black and one of them would be white.
It was a moment that would change the course of a 2-year investigation.
When he pulled those two pictures out and set them aside, I was trying my best not to look at Sergeant Patterson, but he had pulled out our 2 prime suspects.
With no prior knowledge, how could the psychic have zeroed in on the 2 prime suspects?
Just about everything that he described was pretty much on the money.
But can a psychic's dark visions help police find justice for Rose Swartwood? For 2 years, Elmira, New York area detectives Mike Moosey and Corky Patterson have been hunting the vicious killer of an elderly widow.
Very unusual for us to have a crime like that. It was extremely rare here.
With little evidence and no witnesses, the police investigation had hit a wall, until a psychic identifies the 2 prime suspects, suspects who, up to now, detectives haven't had the evidence to arrest.
When he completed going through all the photographs, he put the rest of them down and said that he felt that the 2 that he had pulled out, that being the photographs of Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy, were in fact the 2 people that he felt were directly involved in the crime of the death of Rose Swartwood.
William Cuddy is a name very familiar to Elmira police.
Cuddy was doing time. He pled guilty in June of '89 to the sexual abuse charge that I had originally investigated him on. And I think he caught a 1.5 to 4 year bid. So he was at that time in KU, a correctional facility.
William Cuddy was a suspect because a jailhouse informant had contacted Detective Moosey saying Cuddy had been bragging in jail about killing Rose. But when the detective tried to question Cuddy, the prisoner wouldn't talk.
He had an incredible loss of memory. He did not wish to remember any of the details and immediately posed a problem for us.
Demetrius Moore is another story.
Demetrius Moore was actually a neighbor of the victim and was questioned along with several other people as a potential suspect.
Moore has remained a suspect because he had a motive. He blamed Rose and her complaints about his loud music for his eviction from Hawthorne Court.
In fact, a few weeks prior to her death, some obscenities were written on her back door, which later during the investigation was alleged that Demetrius was the one that was responsible for putting those obscenities on the back door.
People in the neighborhood are afraid of Demetrius Moore. Rumors on the street say he is linked to the criminal underworld. His reputation has been a major stumbling block to the investigation.
Demetrius was free and on the street, and which was another thing that hampered some people wanting to cooperate with us.
By pulling the 2 mugshots, Phil Jordan has confirmed the suspicions of the detectives. Now the psychic has a vision of the actual crime.
Whenever I work a case, I not only try to discover how the person may have died, but I also try to figure out what the injuries were inflicted with. In this case, I felt as though she was stabbed, and I could feel that there'd be a rather long knife that was used.
Ultimately, there were several stab wounds, which Miss Swartwood suffered as a result of this crime.
If one was to read the autopsy report, they'd understand that Mr. Jordan's descriptions were quite correct.
The psychic also claims he can see which of the two suspects actually stabbed Rose.
Phil described to us that the person who did the actual slaying, the actual killing itself, would have a tattoo on their shoulder.
I noticed a marking on his arm that would be a tattoo, and I felt that it had a woman's name in it, but I couldn't make out the woman's name.
I knew that Cuddy had such a tattoo on his left shoulder. Mike was not aware of it. No one else connected with the case was aware of it.
And that he was the perpetrator, the assailant that killed Rose Swartwood.
The tattoo is a stunning revelation, one that Jordan had no way of knowing.
Yeah, he was able to describe Mr. Cuddy as being a vicious person, a person who hated women, had a deep hatred for women.
I'm working a case. Some of the things I see may seem trivial or ridiculous to the investigation, but may prove to be very significant. I felt that out of her own nature, her own character, and her own nervousness, she would twirl this ring on her finger with her thumb. And there was something about the ring. It was a very large ring and a high-set ring, and there's something that just, that whole situation caught my eye. And so I asked them about the ring, and they didn't know anything about it.
Subsequent to that, we interviewed Rose's sister, and we asked about jewelry in general, whether she wore it, whether she had a lot of it. Her sister had told us that she did wear a cocktail ring on her ring finger, and then proceeded to tell us that she twirled it with her thumb repeatedly. And I mean, that is information that certainly neither one of us knew.
After 2 frustrating years, Detectives Moosey and Patterson's visit to Phil Jordan re-energizes the case. More than ever, they believe Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy are responsible for the death of Rose Swartwood.
We left there with some pretty surprising feelings that he had told us things about Cuddy that probably not a lot of people had known or even investigated.
But now the police must prove that Cuddy and Moore are the killers, and it's not going to be easy.
So we continued to build the case, and we weren't going to jump before we had all the evidence we could collect and all the information that we needed.
A major difficulty has been placing Cuddy and Moore at the crime scene. The detectives revisit the forensic evidence.
There was a sample of blood that was found at the point of entry, which is a rear door, a small broken window.
The drop of blood doesn't match the DNA of either Rose Swartwood or William Cuddy, but trying to match it to Demetrius Moore has stymied the police.
You would have to apply for a court order. And in this case, in order to get a court order, you would at least need enough evidence to substantiate that this person was a viable suspect. Initially, we didn't feel we had enough evidence to do that.
The other piece of forensic evidence comes from the victim's body, bite marks. In the struggle before she died, Rose Swartwood was bitten on the shoulder.
Bite marks are very difficult to identify most of the time, especially when the victim is the receiver of the bite mark.
Though the psychic and the cops both believe William Cuddy stabbed Rose, the investigators don't believe he bit her, and for good reason.
Mr. Cuddy wore dentures, and it was clear that the person who did the biting didn't wear dentures.
If Moore and Cuddy were accomplices in the murder, Moore must be the one who did the biting.
There was actually a photograph taken of Demetrius Moore's teeth on the day of the homicide. When he was being interviewed, the detectives thought enough and were smart enough to take a voluntary picture of his teeth.
Demetrius Moore's teeth may be the key to solving the murder mystery, but he's about to do something no one could ever imagine. For 2 years, detectives Mike Moosey and Corky Patterson have been investigating the murder of elderly widow Rose Swartwood.
This was an absolute senseless crime from the very beginning.
Psychic Phil Jordan has identified the 2 prime suspects, Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy.
At the time of the incident, I believe that I felt one of the perpetrators would be black and one of them would be white.
Detectives have only 2 significant pieces of evidence. a single drop of blood and bite marks found on the victim. Police believe the bite marks belong to Demetrius Moore, but before they can prove it, Moore does something very strange.
The unique thing there was it was found that Demetrius had filed his teeth.
Using a chisel, incredibly, Moore files down his own teeth. What's worse for detectives, they're still unable to obtain a warrant to test Moore's DNA or indeed make a mold of his now damaged teeth. Frustrated, the detectives return to Phil Jordan. What they really want to know is what connects their two prime suspects.
There was no information, or anyone had never come forward to put those two together at any given time.
Again, the psychic, who has been told nothing about the case, amazes the detectives. He confirms their belief that Cuddy and Moore were together at a party the night Rose was killed.
I felt as I observed the party, it would be a party I would not want to go to because I know I would feel uncomfortable by the character of people that were there. I could see that it was people having a good time, but yet more for the sake of partying to probably drink and get high.
The party is crucial to the investigation. It's the potential link that puts Cuddy and Moore together the night of the murder.
When we learned about the party initially occurring the night of the homicide, it was very difficult for us to get people at the party to remember who came, who left, who was there, who came with who. So locating people that were at the party for additional information on these two or anyone else that might have been with them was very difficult for a period of time.
I remember very distinctly seeing the house where I felt that the party had taken place, that there would have to be an enclosed stairwell going up the outside of the house.
He felt that the house was, I believe he said, green in color and had a very distinct outside staircase, which led to a second floor, which Sergeant Patterson and I knew to be the location of the party house.
I felt as though they would be first at the party, they would leave the party, commit this heinous act, and then go back to the party, which showed me they probably had little conscience.
Is Jordan's paranormal vision correct? Armed with these new details of the party provided by the psychic's vision, the detectives find more witnesses who were there that night, and now, 2 years later, several agree to talk.
We did have people that came forward, finally, and did remember Cuddy coming with Demetrius Moore. Yes, that link was finally made through additional witnesses.
Those witnesses now paint a startling portrait of Moore and Cuddy's behavior the night of the murder.
Demetrius and Cuddy left the party to supposedly go get some beer and money for beer and drugs or whatever. And that when they returned, Cuddy had a lot of blood on him. Demetrius had a small amount on him. And there was some argument out on the porch, and I believe Demetrius was saying something like, you didn't have to kill her like that.
Once again, Phil Jordan was right. Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy were together the night Rose Swartwood was killed. Finally, police have the link that puts their suspects together the night of the crime. They can now get the court order to compare Moore's DNA with that single drop of blood found at the crime scene.
We certainly felt confident that there would be a match, or at least a grouping that was consistent with, which would be sound evidence against him being at the scene of the crime, which he had denied, for years at this point.
Demetrius Moore's DNA matches the blood found on Rose Swartwood's broken window. Moore and Cuddy are charged with the first-degree murder of Rose Swartwood. At the trial, Moore challenges one of the key pieces of evidence against him, that he filed down his teeth.
The most unusual thing I ever saw on a witness stand. His excuse was, when he took the stand, his teeth were chipped up like that because he opened beer bottles with his teeth. And he opened up 2 beer bottles on the stand. His lawyer wanted to show the jury on the stand.
What it didn't do is alter the pattern of his teeth. It certainly altered the ridges of the teeth.
Though they couldn't match the bite marks exactly, it didn't do him any good to file his teeth.
Evidence at the trial showed Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy met at the party house. When they ran out of drugs and alcohol, Moore suggested they rob Rose.
Unfortunately, she had returned home that evening and was found in the apartment. She had apparently been getting ready for bed or just going to bed when the entry was made.
The robbers surprised Rose. There was a struggle. Moore bit the elderly, defenseless victim on the shoulder. Then William Cuddy began to stab her, and he stabbed her over 40 times. After killing Rose Swartwood, Cuddy and Moore dragged her body to her bed, and before leaving, they methodically washed the blood from the floor and the walls, missing just a single drop. Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy are both found guilty, and both men are sentenced to 25 years.
I can't speak for the jury, so I don't know if it had an impact on the jury or on the trial. It had an impact on me that someone could not only brutally murder a 72 or 74-year-old woman this way, but then stay around and clean it up afterwards. They have to have no remorse, no conscience.
Today, the detectives are still amazed at the accuracy of Phil Jordan's visions. The psychic pulled William Cuddy and Demetrius Moore's photo from a stack of mugshots and identified Cuddy as the killer by a tattoo on his shoulder. Phil described the attack as a robbery gone bad and the party house where Cuddy and Moore hatched their plan.
A good psychic can provide you with leads or something or an avenue to go on when you don't have any.
Don't rely too heavy on information that cannot be substantiated, but certainly if you've done your investigation and, he's done some pretty amazing things.
They wanted to resolve the case for the family and for Rose, but they also wanted the community to be safe.
When his daughter disappears, a desperate father turns to a psychic for answers.
She's passed.
The psychic tells him she's already dead.
My mind just didn't want to accept it.
But detectives are skeptical.
As a detective, I have to look at hard, plain facts.
But as her visions begin to ring true, they bring a warning.
How's she in trouble?
I really feel panic.
Same guy that killed Stacy is gonna kill again.
Can the psychic lead police to a killer before it's too late? July 22nd, 1992. In Tempe, Arizona, a suburb of Phoenix. College student Stacy Hendrickson disappears from her apartment without a trace. She was just 21. For her father back home in Ohio, it's the worst thing he can imagine.
I never ever thought I'd have to face this kind of thing in my life. My mind just didn't want to accept it. And then finally when it hit me, like I say, my knees buckled and I just fell in the chair.
In Arizona, Stacy was going to college, away from home for the first time. A compassionate, caring young woman, Stacy was training to help children with diabetes, a condition she herself suffered from. If she's still alive, her disease may be her worst enemy.
There's a time element involved, and it's very serious. She's probably got approximately 48 hours before she'd go into insulin coma.
Tempe, Arizona detective Alan Reed is placed in charge of the investigation. He begins at her apartment, where she was last seen.
We knew that Stacy was missing and that she was diabetic, and I found inside the refrigerator her insulin, which she needed to take. And we thought that she would have taken that with her if she had gone voluntarily with someone. But it was obvious that there had been some type of force used, as we had two forced open doors.
Stacy's roommate, Virginia, was at her mother's the night Stacy disappeared. She provides a list of friends for police to talk to. Reed hopes one of them will know where Stacy is. But back in Ohio, 2,000 miles from the investigation, Stacy's father can't just sit back and wait. A neighbor convinces him to talk to a psychic.
Hi, I'm Raleigh.
Hi, Neil. I felt some desperation in his voice that kind of made me realize that whether he was skeptical or not, he was at wit's end.
Gail St. John claims she can see and feel things that most of us cannot. Her gift has helped to find other missing children. Maybe she could find Stacy.
When I started looking at Stacy's picture, and I was just kind of, just picking up vibrations between looking at the picture and feeling Raleigh, and just kind of, and all of a sudden, just, it was so fast, Stacy was next to me. And I kind of took Raleigh's hand and said to him, I have to tell you something. Stacy's gone.
And I just kind of a lump in my throat. And she starts describing an area.
I'm seeing this building that's
saying that there's a small building about probably 12 by 14.
But this building was like a corrugated metal, which struck me as really odd, because it really couldn't, and then a fence around it, which I kept looking, thinking, what, this doesn't make sense. This isn't like I would picture a building myself. And seeing the large equipment, it moved dirt, and that's not something you see sitting everywhere.
I asked her, I says, when she was describing this building, I says, is she in this building? She goes, no. She says she's very close by. And she said there's water real close by.
What does it all mean? Could Stacy be showing Gail where to find her body?
Then I looked down, straight down, and the dirt was cracked. And I had never seen anything like this before. And I was trying to, describe all the things that I saw where she was. And I'm trying to walk like a trail.
She was like in her own little world, but if she wasn't in no trance, she just basically was walking around the room and just talking. I started thinking that she's actually right there.
But Gail St. John is picking up more than just visions.
Along with voice and showing me pictures, she was impressing with feelings of things that, happened. And it first started out with the burning, hot burning sensation I felt in the back of my head. And from there, I could feel something with the wrist, and I felt pain. It was almost a like rope or something around the wrist, and it really felt that hot burning when it went into me. I actually saw everything just go black around me.
Gail believes Stacy was murdered, bound and shot in the back of the head.
But there's a lot of things you try not to go into as far as those details.
Whether she was real, it was an act, whether having the skepticism that I had, and being 2,000 miles away or 1,800 miles away, I just didn't know. I couldn't say it was for real or it wasn't at that point in time. Later on, that's a different story, but right then
Back in Tempe, Arizona, Detective Reed's investigation continues. He has few leads, but forensics have unearthed one important clue. Whoever forced their way into Stacy's apartment left fingerprints behind. Maybe someone in Stacy's apartment complex saw something.
Have you heard anything unusual in the last several hours?
No.
Reed gets lucky. Stacy's neighbor across the hall witnessed the break-in.
Pushing on the door and banging on the door.
Who was this mysterious intruder? Did he kill Stacy as the psychic believes? The disappearance of a 21-year-old college student in Tempe, Arizona sends a desperate father to a psychic. But what she sees, he doesn't want to hear. She tells him his daughter is already dead, but police believe Stacy Hendrickson has been abducted and could still be alive. Now they've found a witness who could lead them to Stacy.
He hears the sound of steps coming up to the second-floor apartment. And as he is awake, he hears some pounding on the door. So he looks through the peephole and he sees this young white male, approximately 25 years old, banging on the door.
Banging on it, and there's no answer or anything, so finally
he tries forcing open the door with his shoulder, with his hands, and then does a little drop kick and then makes entry. What concerned me is the neighbor doesn't call the police. Told me that it was his opinion that this was a boyfriend-girlfriend dispute. He didn't want to get involved. He told me that he went back to bed and heard nothing further. So he really had no other information that was helpful, other than he told me that the person that entered was a white male, clean-cut looking, and was wearing a very distinctive black T-shirt. And he said that this black shirt had on it a skull.
In Ohio, Roland is desperate to find out anything about his daughter, so he calls Detective Reed and tells him about Gail St. John and her strange visions. At first, his request falls upon deaf ears.
Yeah, I considered psychics and stuff that they did. The word I use is mumbo-jumbo.
So all I could do at that point was listen close and pass on what she had told me to the detective that was actually there in Arizona, and see if he recognized anything I was talking about.
As a cop, I have to look at hard, plain facts. And so, as a courtesy, and it was a courtesy to Raleigh, we contacted Gail St. John.
Would this be the phone call that would change the course of Detective Reed's investigation?
I was so busy, and I was so not wanting to waste my time. I gave Gail's number to a partner that was working this case with me. I asked him to call.
I kind of felt the skepticism, but there was a bit of willingness to listen.
I've got something to write with. Chain.
Gail tells Reed's partner where they'll find Stacy's body. She describes palm trees to the south, a chain-link fence, cracked dirt, a small corrugated shed with a slanted roof. And then she tells the detective something she hasn't told Roland. Gail believes Stacy was murdered, shot in the back of the head.
When I first told him that you're dealing with a murder rather than an abduction, he was kind of hesitant, to the point of almost kind of saying, no way.
But Detective Reed is not about to turn his missing persons investigation into a homicide based on the word of someone who claims to talk to dead people.
The information she had given to us was useless. It didn't lead us anywhere. We couldn't put that information out on a police radio or even begin to look anywhere. And at this point, we don't even have a body. We don't even have a victim.
You know, there is really no convincing someone that you're right or you're wrong. You have to let things fall into place. If I tell you something and then later it happens, then it fell into place, now you understand, you believe.
2 days later, after the call, something does happen. Something that will change Reed's skepticism forever. A city worker finds a body in a dumpster next to the Tempe Canal.
This was just another routine, if you will, death call for me. But as I drove down that canal road, I start to remember, all right, now, Gail said it was near water. Well, the canal's full of water. I get out of my police car and I see palm trees to the south. I look down and I'm walking on cracked earth. And oh my gosh, I see a rolling machine, which is a conveyor belt. And this machine specifically removes debris from the canal as it floats down and places that debris into a dumpster. The hair on the back of my neck was just standing straight up because everything that Gail had told the police, it was like a picture. It couldn't be a better match.
When police remove the body, it's so badly decomposed from the hot sun and water that a photo ID is impossible.
However, I want you to know that even though I could not make a positive ID of her at that point, based on what Gail said, in my heart, I knew that this was Stacy Hendrickson.
One other clue convinces Reed the body is Stacy's, something Gail St. John said.
And as I picked Stacy's body up, I could see that she had ligature marks on her wrist and that she had been bound. And she was x-rayed, and it was apparent from the x-ray that she had been shot in the head. And at that point, I became somewhat of a convert to the information and the gift or the ability that Gail St. John had.
A hard-boiled detective is now a believer, and with a killer on the loose, he wonders what else Gail St. John knows. Can the psychic really help the cop find Stacy's killer?
I can't tell you how astounded I am. I do have a killer out there, and the information you gave us was accurate.
I think he, at that point, dropped his skepticism and was more open to saying, okay, now I see what you said was right. Where do we go from here?
The next day, Stacy's father flies to Arizona to help ID the body of his daughter. He has yet to see how accurate Gail was.
I was hoping it wasn't Stacy. That's what my guts was saying.
Still waiting for dental records to make a positive ID, Detective Reed shows Roland 3 earrings that he recovered from the body.
I had bought her 3 diamond studs, and they graduated from small to a medium to a little bit bigger. And she was minus an ear on the one side, but this ear had these 3 diamonds in it. And that was a very identifying thing to me, because it had only been a couple months that I'd bought those and she wore them. So yeah, I felt that at that point that was definitely Stacy.
Detective Reed takes Roland to the bleak spot where his daughter was found.
When we got there, he was amazed. He was amazed at what he saw, that were really exactly as Gail had said.
What really gets to me, I think, is I always told my daughter, if you ever are in a problem and you're in need of help, you call Dad, and Dad will be there to take care of it. And I drill on that constantly. To have to come and find your daughter or your son in a situation like this where they wind up basically, you know, dumped in a dumpster like garbage, it's pretty hard to take. It just...
Once we had recovered Stacy's body, I can't begin to describe the pressure then that begins.
Just as Gail St. John predicted, Detective Reed has a homicide on his hands. Reed now follows up on dozens of leads, but none lead to a suspect. The psychic was right about where Stacy's body would be found and the terrible way in which she died. Can she now lead police to her killer?
I saw people divided up into 2 camps. I had people who said, this is a bunch of baloney. You know, a lady who claims to be psychic or who talks to the dead, that's a bunch of baloney. I had other people in the police department say, Al, you need to listen to this lady. And they would relate personal experiences to me that they have had. So I was encouraged by probably half to pursue this avenue with Gail, and the other half were laughing at me. And there were some people also that said, hey, you maybe need to look at her as a suspect. And I guess if you are someone that gives police information about a crime, you know, a lot of times that person giving the information is responsible.
Days after discovering the body, Reed gets a disturbing call from Gail.
I really feel panic. I feel panic.
She says the killer is about to strike again.
The same guy that killed Stacy is going to kill again. Who's he going to kill?
Gail believes his next victim will be Stacy's roommate, the girl who was staying with her mother the night Stacy disappeared.
Very upset.
In Tempe, Arizona, a missing persons case has become a full-scale homicide investigation. eerily. Psychic Gail St. John predicted that 21-year-old Stacy Hendrickson had been murdered days before police found her body. Now Gail is warning police that the killer is about to kill again. She says that Stacy's spirit has told her that the next victim will be her roommate, Virginia.
The same guy that killed Stacy is gonna kill again. Who's he gonna kill? Virginia. I mean, she's real specific.
She's talking about the roommate. I'm feeling terrible panic now. Stacy's just going wild here, trying to describe what's happening and what's gonna happen, and the roommate's life is in danger. She's gonna go see this guy, and she's just going so fast, I'm trying to absorb it, and you know, of course, the detectives, are you still there? Well, yeah, but I'm trying to listen to your conversation and hers. And sometimes you feel like you're halfway between two worlds.
I'm not sure of it. I'm not sure of what's gonna happen. She's actually telling me that the same person who killed Stacy Hendrickson is gonna kill again, and the person is gonna be Stacy's roommate. That's pretty specific. And part of me goes, you know, this is pretty outlandish. The other part of me says, you know what, I can't disregard it. Look what happened when we went to the scene and found all those things she said.
Reed heeds Gail's warning and asks Virginia, Stacy's roommate, to come down to the station. Gail has also told him that Virginia knows the killer and is reluctant to make him a suspect.
I tell her that Stacy's father had contacted a lady who has a gift. And this lady we have found to be very accurate. And I then tell her the story of how we found Stacy's body. And as I'm talking to Virginia, I'm placing the Polaroids in front of her. And I can tell that she's somewhat disturbed at what I'm saying. And then I look at her in the eyes, and I said, I just got a call from Gail St. John. And she says that the same person who took the life of your friend is gonna kill you tonight. And when I said those words, the blood drained out of her face. She turned white, and she teared up. And I'll never forget, she immediately said to me, check out John, check out John.
John Adams is a 26-year-old manager of a local fast food restaurant. Adams met both Stacy and her roommate just a few weeks before Stacy was killed. Incredibly, Virginia has a date with him that very night. With no time to lose, Reed tracks down Adams at his workplace. If Gail is right, this man's prints should match the set left on Stacy's door.
He was very cordial, and he was very cooperative. He told me that he knew Stacy. He told me that he was dating Virginia. I saw no sign of emotion from him. I asked him if he could assist me in the investigation by allowing me to take his photograph and also to take a sample of his fingerprints. When I left that restaurant, I was really not confident that that was my killer. He was just way too cool, calm, and collected. Again, my faith was going to be put in those fingerprints.
The prints turn out to be a perfect match, but that's not enough to charge Adams. There's no murder weapon, and nothing as yet that links him to the shooting.
And Gail St. John she's done her job, and it's now my job to build a factual case of things that people understand in court that I can use to put him away.
Reed's hard work finally pays off. Adams does own a skull t-shirt that matches the one the neighbor saw the man banging on Stacy's door wearing. Not only that, but it turns out that Adams had recently bought a gun, the same caliber as the murder weapon. Armed with the new evidence, Reed pulls Adams in for questioning. Once again, Gail St. John's eerie predictions are confirmed.
So everything is now just adding up. Everything points to John Adams. And I need to convince him to make this right, to tell the truth. We began the interview and talking about, really, John. In the back of my mind is a warning that I received from Gail St. John. And she has told me I need to be very careful with him. John is full of rage and anger, But she tells me that he can change from this nice, courteous young man to a raging bull. And I need you to know that John will try to hurt me. And at a certain point in the interview, I could tell that John was ready to talk. John began to weep, and he did tell me at that point that he did kill Stacy Hendrickson. You did what?
I killed Stacy.
And I told him that this was a murder and that I would have to charge him with a murder. And I did use that emotional word. What happened, I'll never forget. From this very sorrowful, repentant young man who has his head down, his shoulders slumped, his hands clasped, tears streaming down his face, changes in the twinkling of an eye and becomes this raging bull and attacks me. Again, what Gail St. John had said was true. This man attacked me.
John Adams is charged with the murder of Stacy Hendrickson, and he eventually makes a full confession. In court, the final terrible moments of Stacy's last night alive were revealed. On July 22nd at 2 a.m., Adams arrived at Stacy's apartment, fueled on drugs and alcohol. He banged on the door, kicked it in, and chased Stacy into the bedroom. There, he shot her in the back of the head, her pillow muffling the sound of the bullet and the bedsheets catching the spray of blood. Adams then wrapped her body in the blood-stained sheets and dumped the evidence in the Tempe Canal. Days later, it was siphoned from the water and deposited in a dumpster, the exact location described by Gail St. John.
I went on to work homicide almost 10 years, and in those 10 years, I never, ever dealt again with someone like Gail St. John.
Stacy saved her roommate's life. That's what it boils down to. If she hadn't said it to me, if she hadn't got that across to me, then we would have had another murder.
In court, Adams pleads guilty to manslaughter and is sentenced to 29 years in jail.
I feel you'd have to be a little crazy to do something like that, but I don't know how they feel. What promotes them thoughts to do things like that to some innocent person? After all, she was in her room bed, sleeping. She wasn't bothering anybody. You know, why?
This time on Psychic Investigators. A swimming instructor is found stabbed to death in a quiet Florida town.
Someone couldn't have walked out of there that wasn't covered with blood.
But the case is going nowhere, fast.
There was no physical evidence to arrest him.
Until a psychic claims to see the killer.
It's just a disgusting crime of extreme terror.
But are his visions enough to crack the case?
He says, the killer's nearby, the killer's nearby.
(1977), Boynton Beach, Florida, an hour north of Miami. A quiet coastal town where people escape the troubles of everyday life. Violent crime generally happens someplace else. It's August, and May Wentz, a part-time swimming instructor, has run into trouble with her neighbors. May, unmarried and living alone, has a habit of leaving her door open for her beloved German Shepherd, Duke.
She would let her dog run loose and became a problem with the town. And neighbors complaining about dumping garbage cans and so forth.
By August 5th, her neighbors are so fed up, they report the dog. Duke is caught and taken to the pound. Days go by, and neighbors expect to see May looking for her dog. but there's no sign of her. Duke has been left stranded. Finally, on Sunday, August 7th, a worried neighbor checks in and smells a strange odor coming from the bedroom and immediately calls the police.
May Wentz was lying on the floor next to the bed. She had been stabbed.
Sergeant John DiBattista was the first on the scene.
There was a lot of blood all over the bedroom, on the walls, on the bed, on the floor.
Lieutenant Ed Hillary is the lead investigator in the case.
There were 2 pieces of a knife at the crime scene. One was the point of the knife, and then one was a broken part of the blade. We never found the handle.
Aside from this, the killer has left little evidence.
We were able to lift several latent fingerprints, but they were subsequently identified as belonging to May Wentz.
From the state of decomposition, police determine how long May Wentz has been dead.
We had a possible time span of when the crime occurred, and that was 2 to 3 days.
But this only makes things harder for the police. It's the first 48 hours that are the most crucial in any murder investigation, and those hours are gone. Adding to the mystery, nothing in the house seems misplaced, ruling out robbery as a motive. And the autopsy later confirms that there was no sexual assault. Her only enemies, it seems, are feuding neighbors.
We had no reports of cars leaving the area quickly or anything like that, so we had the feeling, with the blood all over the walls, someone couldn't have walked out of there that wasn't covered with blood. If they went any distance, possibly someone would see them. We figured it was somebody nearby.
With little evidence, the detectives have their work cut out for them. The police contact May's family in New Jersey with the news.
I was shocked. There were all kinds of questions running through your mind that, what could have happened? Who could have done this?
The very concept that there might be someone out there randomly attacking women is always alarming to the community.
Laura Belgrave covered the story for the local paper.
I think the community felt fear and something of an anxiety for it to be solved. It was a woman brutally murdered in the kind of fashion that in particular scares all women. And because no one knew who the killer was, you have to worry, is there some crazy out there? Is this someone who could break into my house? She was just an everyday person.
Over the next few days, the police learned more about the 41-year-old swimming instructor.
May was a kind and gentle and quiet person. She had a lot to give to people. She was very active with her swimming lessons. I would go up maybe every few weeks, and we'd go out water skiing or just go down to the beach. It was good times.
As the police dig deeper, the mystery widens.
You ask 10 different people about May Wentz, and they'll give you 10 different answers.
She didn't get along very well with neighbors. Not to the extent that, there was altercations or anything like that, but a lot of verbal stuff back and forth. They'd get a lead, and they'd say, this is it, we're gonna, and it would peter out. It was difficult. It could have been anybody.
But 2 neighbors do stand out from the crowd. Brothers Darris and Jerry Mills both have a long history with local law enforcement. They live directly across the street from May Wentz.
They had been involved with Boynton Beach Police Department on several different occasions. Drunken, disorderly, fighting, and things like that.
With no other leads, police decide to check them out. Detective DiBattista conducts a voice stress analysis, a test similar to a lie detector. It measures psychophysiological stress responses in the human voice.
The voice stress analysis that I performed on Jerry, I asked him several questions, and he showed deception, he showed stress on several of the controlled questions. And it was my opinion that he had knowledge of the homicide. As far as Darris Mills goes, he didn't show deception.
Based on the interviews, Detective DiBattista suspects Jerry Mills knows more than he's saying, but his hands are tied.
There was no physical evidence of which to arrest him.
All you got was sort of a floating, well, that week I might have done this or I might have done that. I was drunk, I got in a fight. That's the kind of stuff you'd get from them, but nothing you could pin them down with as to where they were.
Weeks go by, and the May Wentz case is slowly going cold. By a strange twist of fate, the National Enquirer is holding a psychic demonstration in Boynton Beach. The chief of police has been invited, but he tells Detective Ed Hillary to go in his place.
I said, you gotta be kidding. I said, you want me to go see a spoon twister? Right? He says, yeah, I want you to go up there for me because I promised him I'd be there. Before Ed left, I said, Ed, why don't you talk to this psychic? Maybe we can get him to take a look at the May Wentz case. Ed wasn't very happy when I asked him about that, using black magic to solve homicides, but we had no physical evidence to go on. You know, it had worked in the past, let's try it.
At the demonstration, Detective Hillary meets with well-known psychic Phil Jordan and learns he's also deputy sheriff in his hometown of Ithaca, New York.
My psychic insights with police investigation are to perceive impressions about a crime that ordinary investigation has not been able to come up with.
The fact that he had been used to find people that were lost, find bodies, that impressed me.
The detective invites Phil Jordan to the station to look into the case. But will his psychic insights help to solve the brutal murder of May Wentz?
She's trying to fight. There's blood spattering all over.
41-year-old May Wentz is found stabbed to death in her Boynton Beach, Florida home. 4 weeks have passed. The killer is still at large. With no hard evidence and dwindling leads, detectives turn to psychic Phil Jordan for help.
And I had all the files here to give me. He said, no, I don't want to touch that. I don't want to know anything about the file. Just give me a picture.
As I looked at the picture of May Wentz, I began to perceive a lot of different things. I felt her to be a very independent woman. I felt she was a good person, but very much an individual, very much to herself. I see that she's a twin. I see a pink house. I began to sense things about the murder itself. And I see them violently stabbing May Wentz.
Phil Jordan is dead right about the way May Wentz died.
From not knowing anything about it, told us that she was stabbed. It was pretty amazing.
Even more astounding, May did have a twin, her sister Loretta.
The fact that he knew that there was a twin before we did certainly impressed me.
The police are also intrigued at the mention of a pink house.
They took me to the scene of the crime. They told me that this was the house the crime occurred in, and I was taken back a bit because I perceived the house to be pink in color.
As it turns out, the house was pink.
We noticed right away that the house was a different color because the owner of the house had repainted it after it was cleaned up, and I guess he was getting ready to try and rent it or sell it.
I immediately felt I had to go in the house because I believed that's where the crime did occur. I had an eerie feeling about the bedroom. I stood in the doorway and I began to sense things. I see a person. I see him coming into the house. I see that he's wearing a brown uniform. I see May Wentz. And I see the crime beginning to be created. she's trying to fight. She was aware of who was doing it. And I see him stabbing her with a knife. Her body's being punctured with that knife. There's blood spattering all over. You actually feel the knife penetrating your own being where it penetrated her being. And then as the chaos continued, I realized that the tip of the knife was broken off. It hit a part of her body or a bone that broke the tip of the knife right off. Then I feel the need to get out of there. Something's drawing me to the outside. The person that committed this crime was close.
Phil walked across the street, and he stopped.
It's almost like a suffocating feeling. A fear or a paranoia overcomes you.
He says, my God, the killer's nearby, the killer's nearby.
And he's looking right at the Mills brothers' house. That really got me.
Now I'm becoming a believer because we never told him that the Mills residence was where we had suspects. It was kind of creepy.
The psychic's revelations seem to confirm what the police already suspect, that one of the Mills brothers killed May Wentz. But where is the rest of the broken knife?
I immediately asked myself, where would the handle of the knife be? The thing that kept coming to me was under a boat, under a boat. Where is the boat? The boat is where the perpetrator of the crime lives.
John and I both looked at the backyard looking for this boat.
What they find? Nothing. Phil Jordan returns to New York, leaving the police to figure out the meaning of the brown uniform and the boat.
Driving back in the car, John and I were looking at each other and say, this guy's on point with things. Let's tell the guys that we possibly should be looking for someone in a brown uniform, maybe a delivery guy. Find out if we can develop any suspects in the area.
Intrigued by the psychic's vision of a boat, the detective has an idea.
John says, you know what we're going to do? We have to look at those aerial photographs.
As far as aerial photographs, that's a standard operating procedure, any homicide, for the crime scene investigator to go up and take aerial photographs of the neighborhood. We went back to headquarters. The first thing we did is we checked the photographs, and we found a boat.
Phil Jordan was right. There was a boat at the Mills residence. Could this be where the murder weapon was thrown on the night of the crime?
On the day the photographs were taken, that was just shortly after the event. When Phil came, there was no boat behind the house. It had been moved.
Although the police now have evidence that there was a boat, they can't get a search warrant on the word of a psychic.
We had no reason to go on the Mills property because, you know, he needed probable cause, and we had no probable cause.
But now, there's another twist.
Investigation brought to light that Darris Mills worked for a landscaping company that wore brown uniforms.
Is this the brown uniform that Phil Jordan claimed to see? Prompted by the psychic's remarkable visions, May Wentz's neighbor, Darris Mills, is now the prime suspect. But without any concrete evidence, how can the police prove he is the killer? A small Florida town is gripped in fear when a swimming instructor is brutally murdered in her home. With the help of psychic Phil Jordan, police now have a prime suspect in their sights, but they can do nothing.
In any murder investigation, you're going to have to be able to tie the victim and the perpetrator together. You got to have some physical evidence or eyewitness or something.
It's very frustrating that you can't make an arrest. When you know deep down that somebody committed the crime.
Sergeant DiBattista and I were particularly bummed out by this because we had a perfect record. It was a thing of pride also for us. And we were working real hard on it. That's the part that hurt, was we wanted to continue that record. We wanted to get this bad guy off the streets, and we just couldn't get it done.
The detectives believe Darris Mills is the killer, but with no proof, the case slowly goes cold.
The investigation continued for several months till everything just sort of ran out. It was looked at less and less and less. Over 3 years, it had petered out to the point where it was a cold case until it just went away. But it didn't go away in our minds, I'll tell you that.
The community really wanted an end and a resolution to the May Wentz case. There was a loss that shouldn't have been. And when you go and you see a neighborhood where this has taken place, for example, it's changed somehow. It's almost in the air.
May's family continues to pressure the police for answers.
As a family member, you don't want the police to stop. You want them to spend every minute of the day on solving that crime. If this happened again, who would be to blame?
Over the years, psychic Phil Jordan stays in touch with detectives from his home in Ithaca, New York.
Though the investigation is cold, the psychic impressions are the same whether they would be 3 years or 23 years. You become so involved in the case that you actually feel a part of the case. And I was sure that Darris Mills was the person involved with the crime.
But the case gathers dust on the shelf for 3.5 years, until the police unexpectedly catch a break. On March 9th, 1981, Darris Mills is brought in on burglary charges. Police call Phil Jordan to let him know.
When I have a case where we have somebody in custody, I would either do prayers that they would turn themselves in or confess to the crime. That doesn't always have to be verbally done. That can be done just through concentrated effort and thought.
Darris was incarcerated in the county jail. In the middle of the night, he woke up screaming and hollering. The jailer went to him. He says, "I killed a woman in Boynton Beach." He says, "I killed her. I killed May Wentz."
Darris Mills tells police that voices in his head urged him to confess to May Wentz's murder. On the night of August 3rd, 1977, Darris Mills says he went to May's house looking for sex. He claimed they had a one-night stand a few years earlier. Since she always left her door open for the dog, Darris had easy access to the house. He had a knife. He woke her up. They started to fight. Darris choked her and stabbed her until the knife broke. He then fled the house with the handle and threw it in his backyard.
Some of the stuff he said is just tremendous. No question about it. It was on point.
The fact that the knife had been thrown by a boat, and the fact that he knew the gentleman had a brown uniform, he lived in the neighborhood close by. I mean, these weren't things that he was just kind of guessing at.
Darris Mills is convicted on second-degree murder charges. He is later diagnosed with schizophrenia. But could the voices that prompted Darris Mills to confess be something else?
For me, the power of prayer is one of the strongest energies and strongest powers in the world. And I like to believe that that does have strong significance. And I believe in this case it did.
You almost have to believe in psychic power. It really can't be denied.
I'm not going to rule anything out. Apparently it worked.
Some people believe that psychics are fakes or phonies, but I believe that some people do have a gift or a power to be able to foresee things or visualize things.
Whatever prompted Darris to confess, the killer is now behind bars.
Nothing's worse for an investigator than to leave an open case. I was very relieved.
That made us feel good. Bad guy zero. That's the way we felt. Having interfaced with a psychic, I was impressed. As a chief, would I talk to my investigator who's hit the wall, yeah, I'd tell them to try a psychic.
It works. If they can help you solve a case, I think it's well worth trying.
May Wentz's family can finally begin to find closure.
It puts a spot in your heart. You've lost something that's not going to come back, but maybe the process of this being over with can begin.
Grief stops our life. In a tragic death such as May Wentz, it's hard to continue from beyond that point, especially if there's unanswered questions.
A lazy summer day at the lake turns to panic.
I said, "Where's Tom?"
When a 5-year-old boy disappears.
I wondered if he was dead.
Police think he's drowned, but a local psychic says he's lost in the forest.
I could see this little boy lying under a very large tree.
Is the psychic right? Is Tommy Kennedy alive or dead? Empire Lake in picturesque upstate New York, a favorite spot to spend a summer afternoon, especially in the mid-70s.
It was a place where people could go and relax, or bring their picnic lunches and have a nice time.
But for Mary Kennedy, Empire Lake brings back memories of a day she will never forget. On a hot summer day in 1975, Mary Kennedy and her family head to Empire Lake to spend the day swimming.
My fiance and his 2 daughters, Siri and Lisa, and my 2 sons, Ben and Tom, we decided to go down to the lake and give the children a chance to cool off.
After swimming, Fred takes the kids for a nature walk.
It was all 4 of the children. I really don't remember why I didn't go.
Fred and the kids disappear into the woods.
While everyone was hiking, I was lying on the blanket, enjoying the day. Knowing me, I probably had a book with me.
But that enjoyment was about to end.
I see Fred and the children coming towards me. Everybody was sweaty and happy, and I don't see Tom.
Tommy is Mary's youngest son. He's 5 years old.
I felt a moment of panic. Fred comes up to me and I say, "Where's Tom?" And Fred says, "I sent him back to you."
Fred says Tom wasn't wearing shoes, and he complained his feet were hurting.
I sent him back to you just at the beginning of our trip. He was whiny and didn't seem to want to do the walk, and so I sent him back to you. He thought that Tom was more competent than he was. I would not have done that. Oh my God. Where's my child? I remember just jumping up and starting to run around the lake, screaming for him.
They search frantically, backtracking their walk. Perhaps he's just hiding.
He was like a little imp, liked to play tricks on people, or always busy doing something, building tree houses, exploring the fields. He was delightful.
But after 2 hours, no sign of Tommy. To add to their concern, a thunderstorm is moving in. They realize it's time to call the police.
By the time I arrived, Tommy had probably been missing 2 or 3 hours. It was probably somewhere around 4 or 5 o'clock by that time.
Dave Redsiger was a member of the local emergency squad in Spencer.
What we did was contacted all the surrounding fire departments.
I remember standing there and seeing the emergency vehicles beginning to arrive right down on the lawn. You know, they just bypassed the parking lot and they were setting up a command center down there on the lawn. It seemed like every car had a 2-way radio going.
He's wearing a white t-shirt and a pair of plaid shorts.
I remember just regular people beginning to arrive. People standing in groups and being briefed and being told where to go.
Nobody seemed to see him around the campsite. Nobody seen him around the swim area. So you kind of narrow it down to 2 areas, the woods or the lake.
I look over and they're bringing boats in. And that only means one thing.
A dive team goes into the water to search for Tommy.
Near the camping area was heavily dead woods, a lot of stumps, things that, you know, if somebody got in there, they could very easily get entangled underneath the water and not be able to get back to the surface.
And I was just horrified. I was absolutely horrified. and I just wouldn't look at them. Absolutely didn't want to look at them.
The dive team searches the perimeter of the lake, but no sign of Tommy. The storm is getting worse.
Once the weather started to get bad and the lightning started getting pretty nasty, we had to call off the water search.
4 hours had passed since 5-year-old Tom went missing.
And by that time, it was pouring. It was just torrential. And I'm thinking about this little 5-year-old kid with a bathing suit on, out there in the cold rain, in the woods somewhere. And I'm just so scared for him.
8 miles away, in the town of Spencer, 25-year-old psychic Phil Jordan hears the news.
I ran across the backyard, and my landlord was standing in the back door, and she said a little boy was missing up at Empire Lake. She says they think he's in the lake and that he is drowned.
But out of nowhere, the psychic has a vision. He can see little Tommy.
I could see this little boy lying under a very large tree. That showed me that he was probably in the woods and probably not in the lake.
Is Tommy Kennedy still alive, lost in the woods? Is the psychic right? And will anyone listen? In upstate New York, a massive search is underway at Empire Lake for 5-year-old Tommy Kennedy, who vanished during a family picnic.
This little 5-year-old kid, Tommy! Out there in the cold rain. And I'm just so scared for him.
The storm gets worse and day turns to night.
We really started getting some nasty storm weather coming in, and it blew in quite heavy. A lot of rain. And of course with that we got a lot of thunder and lightning, and it got quite cold.
The missing boy's father, Don Kennedy, a local reporter, arrives 8 hours after his son disappeared.
He had been out of town, and he had rushed to the lake.
Don begins frantically searching for his son, but now there's a new danger.
With the lightning and the thunder, we were really afraid of ending up with, more searchers lost besides the boy.
Redsicker has no choice. He calls off the search.
Intellectually, I understood, but my little 5-year-old is out there, still by himself.
Tommy's parents are desperate. Don Kennedy remembers a piece he'd written about a local psychic. By coincidence, it's Phil Jordan.
My 5-year-old child was lost. As far as I was concerned, bring in the National Guard. Bring in anyone who will help search for him and find him.
I was not surprised that he called me. I felt that I might hear from some of the family. He was really pleading. He wanted me to come up to the lake at that time.
The psychic says he can help to find the missing boy, but not just yet.
I just knew that if I went there, I would become contaminated with everyone else's ideas and not follow my own self, my own psychic self. I remember saying to Don Kennedy, I'm really sorry, but I just can't come right now. I have to wait till daylight because I don't want to miss a clue that could help us to find him.
With the search called off, and the psychic refusing to come to the lake until daybreak, Mary Kennedy is losing hope.
I'm wondering if he's cold, wondering if he's scared. I wondered if he was dead.
But back in Spencer, psychic Phil Jordan is already on the case.
I sometimes leaf through the Bible and just point to something. And there was a phrase, and it said something about the children going into the woods.
Suddenly, the psychic has a vision of exactly where to find Tommy. Although he's never been to Empire Lake, he begins to draw a map.
The first thing I knew was that down to my left, there would be 3 boats. And then I could see the building across the lake. And I knew I would have to go into the woods behind the building till we find a clearing. So I drew that all on the map.
But can this crudely drawn map lead to Tommy Kennedy? It's 5 a.m. The storm is over. Tommy Kennedy has been missing an agonizing 16 hours.
No parent should have to spend a night like that. I don't remember whether we ate supper, what we said to each other. It's blank.
Hundreds of volunteers from miles around gather at dawn to resume the search.
There were several fire trucks with personnel on them, at least one ambulance. We got the people together, told them what the boy's name was, and then had them search areas around the lake into the wooded areas, but we concentrated on the area immediately around the camping area and the bathing, swimming area.
I was just tremendously grateful that all these people just showed up.
Psychic Phil Jordan also arrives at the lake to help with the search.
I met Dave Redsicker, who was a friend of mine, but was the investigator in charge. Even I says, well, I have this map.
I was shocked. As simple as the map was, the things that he had drawn on the map were right there.
The 3 boats were there, exactly as I had drawn. And across, you could see a large tent. And I said, that has to be the building. We'll go in behind the tent.
But the searchers think he's wrong.
What he was describing was an area that we hadn't searched yet, because it was an area that we figured was the most remote area or most unlikely area that this child would have gotten into.
But the psychic is confident his map will lead to the lost boy. Before he begins his search, the psychic makes an unusual request.
He asked me for an article of clothing that belonged to Tom. So I asked Phil Jordan if one of his little sneakers would be okay, and Phil said, absolutely.
His mom made sure I had that sneaker, and I tucked that into my belt, and I focused on Tommy Kennedy and finding him.
250 rescuers searched the south side of Empire Lake, the area closest to the spot where Tommy was last seen. Meanwhile, Phil Jordan and 2 volunteers, armed only with a psychic map and a little boy's shoe, head in the opposite direction.
There was myself and these 2 men that I didn't know.
I just wished them good luck, and they headed out into the woods.
25-year-old Phil Jordan has never tested his psychic powers in a life-and-death situation before, and he's never been to Empire Lake. But he has faith in his map.
I know we're going to find him, and we will find him within an hour.
Tommy!
Every little ways I would stop, and I'd say to myself, okay, we have to keep going straight. Now we have to turn left.
Tommy!
Now we have to go up here. We have to go a little bit to the right. And I remember talking to myself through the whole thing so I could block out any of the ideas that others had. It was rugged terrain. There was a hiking path, but it was uphill. A lot of woods, a lot of trees falling across the path, and treacherous going.
Is it possible that a 5-year-old without shoes could have strayed so far? The psychic is now deep in the woods, 2 miles from where Tommy Kennedy disappeared. And so far, the psychic has turned up nothing. And now, one of the 2 men with him is starting to have doubts.
One of them kept saying, everything you're describing is in another direction.
Yet hundreds of volunteers searching in the area where he should be can't find a trace of Tommy either.
Nothing. It was as if Tom had just vanished.
The psychic struggles to keep his vision.
And that's when I would refer to the map and hold on to his sneaker and say, Tommy, I'm coming. I'm going to find you.
But now even the psychic starts to doubt his map.
I was all ready to say, well, maybe we should check that other area and come back here later today.
And then Phil Jordan makes a startling discovery. On the shores of Empire Lake in upstate New York, Mary Kennedy waits desperately for any news of her 5-year-old son, Tommy, who's been missing for over 16 hours.
It was as if Tom had just vanished.
Hundreds of searchers comb the area around the lake where the boy disappeared, but with no luck. Yet 2 miles away, psychic Phil Jordan, following his crude map, has stumbled across a child's footprint.
It was right in front of me. I looked at that footprint and I thought, oh, we must be close, and I got goosebumps, you know.
That footprint convinces the psychic he's on the right track.
I said to the other searchers, now we have to find a clearing. It shouldn't be too far up here. So we continued on, and within moments we found the clearing. I just stood at the opening of the clearing and said to myself, okay, now which way do I have to go? I looked at it sort of as a clock, and I thought, we've got to go where the 11 is. And we went to that area, and there was another path through the woods.
As he climbs a gully, Phil falls behind the other searchers, but he can still hear them calling out Tommy's name. And then, an answer.
Help me! I'm over here!
I woke up to the sound of people calling my name. I started screaming, I'm over here, I'm over here.
The fellow who tried to talk me into going in the other direction, he says, I hear him yelling. He's yelling for help. And so they all ran in the direction that the voice came from.
I saw these men coming towards me with huge smiles on their face. I was very relieved that they had found me. Everybody was giving Phil Jordan congratulations. I could tell right away that he was the one that was responsible for locating me.
I just dropped there and knelt there and thanked God that he had given me this ability and cried. You know, I just sobbed. It was very emotional. He was worried that he had done wrong. He was worried that he was going to be reprimanded. And it was quite the opposite. Everybody was so thankful.
Tommy Kennedy had been missing more than 16 hours. One of the searchers reminds Phil about a prediction he had made.
He says, 58 minutes. And I says, what does that mean? And he says, you told me we'd find him within an hour, and it was 58 minutes after we started.
Tommy's rescuers carry him out to a nearby road.
They had walkie-talkies, and they radioed for help, and soon the ambulance came to a road that was not far from where Tommy actually was.
And the news that Tommy is safe is radioed back to the lake.
Someone comes up to me and tells me that Tom has been found. It's like heaven opened up. I was just so grateful. Then almost instantly, there he is.
After almost 2 days of anguish, mother and son are reunited.
He says, I was camping, Mom. I slept next to a stick. It's a miracle. It's a miracle that he's found, and it's a miracle that he's okay.
Phil Jordan's visions had been right from the beginning. Tommy Kennedy hadn't gone near the lake. Instead, he had wandered deep into the forest.
I immediately started crying and whining as I was walking back, and I'm sure that contributed to me getting lost. I probably wasn't paying attention to the marks on the path. I just started running in circles, and within a very short period of time, the clouds rolled in, and that first lightning bolt came down. Then I was terrified, and I started running and running and running.
Wet, scared, and exhausted, he remembered what his mother had taught him.
I taught my children standard safety, which is you don't go near the water when there's lightning. Find a sheltered place.
I came upon a sort of a clearing, and I found a nice large stick to fend off any attacking animals.
Phil had marked just such a clearing on his map.
I was completely exhausted by that time, so I didn't have any trouble at all falling asleep.
How could a psychic with a crudely drawn map succeed where 250 rescuers failed?
If it hadn't been for Phil, and his map and his abilities, we either wouldn't have found him for a long time or we may not have found him at all.
I'm certain that Phil Jordan saved Tom's life.
Word that Phil Jordan had found a lost boy using his psychic abilities is big news. Even the local sheriff, who is not in the habit of using the paranormal, recognizes his achievement.
And he says, I would like you to become deputized so that if we have other cases, you can work more freely with law enforcement.
So help me God.
At that time, Phil was the only deputized psychic that I was aware of in New York State.
Phil Jordan's amazing accomplishment at Empire Lake paved the way for psychics all over America to team up with police in solving difficult cases.
It was truly an honor to be deputized because at that time in history, psychics were just beginning to be used a little bit in police work.
It's now 32 years since psychic Phil Jordan found little Tommy Kennedy lost in the woods. They haven't seen each other since. Until today.
Good to see you. Well,
Phil still has the shoe that helped him to find Tommy so long ago.
I put it in my belt, and I'd say, okay, Tommy, tell me where you are. Do you remember that day?
I do.
I remember running through the woods. I remember the lightning. I remember finding a stick to sleep with.
Seeing
I remember.
the wild bear.
Exactly. Yeah, like my 5-year-old with a stick is going to do something
That's
to
right,
a bear.
That's right.
But
Well, you were using your head.
Yeah.
That's the best way you knew how.
Right. Yeah. And the next thing I remember is hearing you guys. You know, I heard you calling for me and waking up.
It was that day that I proved my ability to myself. And from then on, no one's ever convinced me that I can't do what I do.
Without him, they might have been looking for my bones, you know?